Roundtable. John, you're watching continuing coverage of the World Healthcare Congress. We're back now with Dr. Gail Wilensky, economist and senior fellow at Project Hope. It's so great to see you, always great to see you, Dr. Wilensky. Well, we certainly have a lot of things that are on the horizon. People aren't sure what's going on with healthcare delivery and who's going to pay for it, who's going to get it. Top of mind to me is there's a lot of announcements from insurance companies who say they're not going to be serving certain markets. They have that option, I guess, but where does it leave the consumer then if certain companies that were supposed to create competition to make prices more affordable to people, if they're not going to be in the market, what are we left with?
We need to be very careful that people understand which markets they're talking about. This is all about the new insurance exchange markets that were part of the Affordable Care Act. Affordable Care Act probably expanded coverage to about 20 million people, most of them through the expanded Medicaid program. The guess is 12, 13 million of those 20 million. The newly insured in the exchanges are probably no more than about 7 million, maybe 8 million. And then some people who had been buying individual coverage on their own also now moved over to the exchanges because they can get it either cheaper or they can get a subsidy that they hadn't been able to get on their own. Those are the markets that are being impacted by the withdrawals. There are about a third of the counties now that are reporting only a single insurer in the exchange. It's an indication that these marketplaces are still churning. We saw very large premium increases for this enrollment year. We're waiting to find out what will happen for the next enrollment year. People think they may know, but actually no one knows until the bids come in. Those are the places that there is worry. For most people in the United States, 330 million of us, 50-some million on Medicare, this is not relevant. For the 165 or 170 million people with employer-sponsored insurance, this is not a relevant issue. For the people that had been on Medicaid and are now newly on Medicaid, this is also not an issue. So people need to understand very small population is being affected. Now, what's the problem? Insurers have been consistently losing money in the exchanges. There are a variety of reasons. If we have time, I'll mention some of them. 1 year or 2 years maybe, a company might stay in if it's losing money, if it sees a better future. Most companies after that can't and won't, and frankly, shouldn't. Even the blues plans are also losing money. They have tended to be the ones that came in first and are staying. I suspect partly because they don't want to threaten their not-for-profit status, that they're afraid might get threatened by Congress if they were to leave. But there is a signal that these markets are not stable when you have people, companies, very successful in most markets, unable to make a go of it. And I can explain some of the policy decisions that help create that.
Well, Dr. Wilensky, even though you say that it's a certain and perhaps smallish number that are going to be impacted, we still have those people perhaps without coverage at all and going back to pre-ACA days?
No.
Okay.
Doesn't look like that's happening. Thus far, whenever it looks like one insurer might go down to 0 insurers, the state has been able to convince an insurer to stay in.
With incentives?
With incentives or talking to them. Also, some of the problems that drove insurance companies into losses started to be addressed. Like there were so many special enrollment periods in an effort by the previous administration to get as many people as possible to sign up. Understandable, commendable at one level, but not so helpful for the insurers. The people who came in late almost always were very high users. And what was worse than that, they paid premiums for 1 month, and they had a high likelihood of dropping out. So it was the worst possible experience.
Okay.
There's been a real effort to limit the special enrollment periods, to actually have people verify that they qualify for this special enrollment, and other strategies to try to help bring stability. So you can bring stability to these markets, but you need to be careful that you don't have too many of your own policies working against you. That's starting to be corrected. I'm not sure we've got the problem fixed yet.
Okay. Let's move to another issue that is top of mind, drug affordability. Do you believe that innovation is being quelched, if you will, by drugs being too expensive, and that if you come up with something new, people won't buy it because it's
No,
it's
I don't see there's any evidence of that.
Okay.
It is a worry about how people will be able to take advantage of these new innovations, and of course also the public programs that frequently are sponsoring, or the private insurers that are sponsoring them, will they begin able to tolerate them? And there is every indication that there is a lot of the so-called new biologics, the specialty drugs, that are in the research pipeline, and when they come out, frequently they are really important drugs, sometimes really innovative drugs, and almost always really expensive drugs. Now, the question about can we find a way to balance encouraging the research and development and all of the time it takes to get to market, which is 10, 12 years, if you're actually successful, and also make it affordable. And that's not an easy trade-off to balance. A lot of people say, well, let's just control those prices. And the answer is you could do that. And everything that was already through the pipeline now would still come on the pipeline. Most of the money has already been spent. But it would have serious effects on the future pipeline and R&D. And it's that balance of trying to get fair returns, not only to the cost of developing the drug, but all the drugs that that company had been working on that blew up somewhere along the line in the clinical trials. And sometimes in the very end stage of clinical trials, we've been reading about major pharmaceutical companies having to announce that they're withdrawing their product in the last stage clinical market, either because of undesirable consequences or because it turns out it's not as effective as it looked early on. So it's a balance. The thing we want to make sure is the FDA does everything it can to expedite competitive, expensive, innovative drugs, because we've already seen in the hepatitis C market that when the second company came on after Sovaldi and Harvoni, that was the Gilead product, when AbbVie came on the market, all of a sudden the big purchasers, the so-called PBMs of pharmaceutical benefit managers, were able to go from $84,000 to $51,000 in negotiating that price. That is a really effective way to make a difference.
Well, what's the motivator for the FDA to expedite the process for approval?
Encouragement from Congress, encouragement from the department, making sure the funds are available, making sure the research slots are available. There's also been an issue with regard to generic drugs. Are there enough generic drugs that are coming on the market? And occasionally we hear these horror stories of somebody who bought up an old generic product that is a very small market, got that drug, and then increased the price by thousands of percent.
Right.
That's a different issue. Having the government, this is no longer a patent issue. This is now trying to figure out how to support a competitor in a very small market, and there are strategies the government could consider at that stage. When it comes to messing around with patents, I would be very worried. That's what encourages the kind of R&D and high-risk ventures that we need to have those innovative drugs. And the older I get, the more I want those companies to keep their R&D up, please.
Yes. You're speaking at a panel, later on, What's Ahead for Healthcare. Tell me, what are some of the other key messages you'll be sharing with the audience today?
The Congress is struggling to figure out how to fix the Affordable Care Act. Everybody, Republicans and Democrats, knows there are policy challenges with the Affordable Care Act. We are unfortunately getting in a position of a war of words. Are we going to repair and reform say the Democrats? Are we going to repeal and replace, say the Republicans? I could name a half a dozen policy changes and then let the wordsmiths decide, is this a reformed ACA? Is this a replaced ACA? Personally, I could care less. But I hope we haven't gotten the Congress where they're at such loggerheads against each other that unless they can win the war of words, they're not going to play together. And meanwhile, of course, the American people are the ones at risks for suffering. But it's not just the Affordable Care Act, as important as that is. We have a new way that physicians are being paid. It's called MACRA. It's replacing a very unpopular way that Medicare, introduced, by the way, when I was running Medicare, introduced in the early 1990s. But a lot of the specifics are being hammered out now, and they're going to be important. They have to do with measuring what characteristics should produce rewards and what characteristics of a physician's practice should produce penalties, and how to encourage more physicians to be in what are called alternative payment mechanisms that encourage better value. So that's a whole nother line. And then, of course, what to do about drug pricing, how to try to continue innovation, but make it affordable. Right. And again, it's not easy. It's much harder than other parts of healthcare because there's that very long investment cycle.
Yes.
And the very long process to get it to market, and a lot of failures along the way. The rest of healthcare, providing hospital services and physician services, it doesn't have the same kind of challenges. It may have other challenges, but it doesn't have those challenges.
Dr. Wilensky, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I do actually want to ask you, we're so lucky to be able to see you year after year. What keeps you coming back?
These issues, as I hope you can tell, are issues I'm absolutely passionate about. Making sure people can get access to health care, getting people insured. I have spent the last 40 years of my life writing about, advocating, trying to push quietly behind the scenes, publicly when appropriate, Congress and administrations to take this on. I don't feel myself getting done out of a job anytime soon.
And is this a good forum in which to share ideas, the
Yes.
World Healthcare Congress?
Yes, because you have a lot of the players, a lot of the affected participants that are coming, meeting, having a chance to see each other and listening to each other.
Dr. Wilensky, thank you again.
You're very welcome. Nice to see you.
And I'm Mabel Jong. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.